Dead girlfriend's Facebook message comes onto this list at number 10. This story comes to us from Reddit. Nathan says that his girlfriend Emily died in a tragic car accident back in 2012. Approximately 1 year later, Emily returned from the dead to communicate with Nathan through Facebook. Is this real life right now? According to Nathan, only him and Emily's mom have access to her Facebook. Take a look for yourself. Here are some screenshots of the Facebook messages sent from beyond the grave. If that wasn't creepy enough, Emily started to tag herself in photos in the background. But wait, there's more. Emily even took a picture of Nathan and sent it to him. I don't know about you guys, but I'm thinking Nathan wasn't the greatest boyfriend, and she should probably deactivate his Facebook account because this is just way too much to handle. Next up on our list, at number 9, we have phone calls after death. Let's go back to September 12, 2008, when a commuter train that was carrying 225 people collided with the freight train and crashed. 135 people were injured, 25 people unfortunately died. One of the people that lost their lives that day was 49-year-old Charles E. Peck. He had 3 children and he was engaged to his fiancée Andrea Katz. Well, once the crash was broadcasted, his fiancée was driving to the train station to pick him up with his parents and siblings. His body was recovered from the wreckage 12 hours after the incident, but for the first 11 hours, his cell phone made several calls to his loved ones. It called his son, brother, stepmother, sister, and his fiancée. In total, his family received 35 phone calls that night, but when they answered, all they heard was static. When they tried to call back, it went straight to voicemail. It was later discovered that he had died on the impact, but long after he died, his cell phone somehow continued to reach out to his loved ones, almost saying like, "Hey, I'm okay." Maybe he was trying to reach out to them one last time beyond the grave. It's really scary and creepy when you think about it, but imagine just having that one more opportunity to listening to your loved ones that have passed away. So because of the phone calls, the rescue team was able to find his body, but they were never able to find his cell phone. I mean, what a creepy ending to that story. What happened to the cell phone? Who was making the phone calls? A warning message from beyond the grave takes us to number 8. On September 20th in 1988, a man received a very unexpected phone call. When he answered his cell, it was a familiar voice that sounded far away. She said, "Please be careful." He tried to ask who it was, but instead the ghostly voice repeated its warning 3 more times before hanging up. The phone number was unlisted, but he said that the voice sounded like his mother. But she had been dead for almost 2 years, so that's a big problem. 2 days after this scary phone call, he went to visit his father in a facility. The staff warned him that his father had become very violent, and maybe if he talked to him it would help his father. Well, once he got into the room, his father grabbed a knife from the drawer and tried to attack his son. If it wasn't for that phone call, he might not have been paranoid or acted as quickly as he did. Young boy sends his parents signals after death, and this takes us into number 7. Ray Dow Jr. was only 10 years old when he died in an accident while riding his bike. He took a sharp turn onto a steep hill, and that led him into a cemetery. His parents believe that their son is sending them signals that led them to know that he's okay and that he has come to terms with his death. Here are some of the signs. On the day that he died, his mom had took off one of his artworks from the fridge because she wanted to frame it. She placed it underneath another painting of Jesus Christ in the clouds, so the family believes that this was a premonition of his death. The family also says that when they visit the place where he died, they can feel his spirit. One day they brought flowers and a balloon to where he died, and a butterfly landed on the balloon and then moved to an angel statue. The family believes that he's communicating with them and he wants them to move on with their lives and be happy, and to let them know that he's okay. And now at number 6, we have a voice message from someone's grandpa. On April 12, 2011, a scary phone call was uploaded onto YouTube. The uploader claims that this is a ghostly phone message from his deceased grandpa who died a few months earlier. Let's have a listen.
Saved message.
Okay, if that's truly real, that's pretty freaky. Is anyone else completely freaked out? Because I am. The phone call only rang once, and the uploader said that he instantly got a voicemail notification. People in the comment section said they can also hear "love you" and "help me." I mean, what do you guys hear? Grandmother attempts to call her grandson from beyond the grave, and this brings us to number 5. A musician by the name of Carl Uphoff claims that he was called by his grandmother who had died 2 days earlier. His grandmother was deaf, but she also called him on the phone to ask if he was even there, though she couldn't hear the answer. One night he got a call while he was hanging out with his friends. On the other end of the line, he said that he heard his grandmother's voice, and when he asked how she was able to call when she was dead, the woman hung up. Over the next several days, there was a ton more calls like this, and each time he asked her who she was or how she was able to call him. This went on for quite a bit until the call suddenly stopped. Haunted text messages climbs up onto this list at number 4. A man claims that his house is haunted by an evil poltergeist. Also claims that he is being haunted by text messages from his dead wife. There are reports that the poltergeist will pull their bed covers off while they sleep. The house had a terrible odor, and you can also feel something or someone breathing in your ears. If that wasn't enough to deal with, the man also claimed that his dead wife is haunting him through text messages. Just after she died, he got a missed phone call on his phone, but it didn't ring. The call was from the house phone, but there wasn't anyone home, so how can that be possible? Once he was inside, it smelled like cigarettes, which his wife used to smoke, and he could smell her perfume as if she was like right there. Since then, he had been getting messages which he believed are from his wife. He said that she always had her phone on her, and they even buried her with her phone. There had been messages with information that only his wife would have known, but there was no number. I mean, would you guys find this comforting or creepy? I mean, comforting in the sense of like, you're still able to communicate with your wife, but she's dead, but it's kind of creepy and scary. Up next, number 3, we have some mysterious emails sent from beyond the grave. Jack Folsey suddenly died at the age of 32 years old from a heart arrhythmia. But 5 months after he died, some of his loved ones started to receive mysterious emails from his account. These emails would mention private conversations that they had with him just before his death. So no one else could possibly have known what was said except for Jack. One of his closest friends said that he got an email notification from Jack. The message said, "Did you hear me? I'm at your house. Clean your effing attic." His friend said he turned ghost white because the two of them just had a conversation in his attic, and Jack had teased him about how messy and how dusty it was in there. No one else would have known about that conversation. Another one of his friends got a strange email from Jack about him breaking his ankle. This happened after Jack was dead. So I guess Jack is still watching over his friends, and he's still able to send them some comforting yet creepy emails. Number 2 brings us to a deceased grandma who is sending texts after death. I didn't know that grandmas were even capable of sending text messages. I mean, I just taught my dad how to send a few texts, and I shouldn't have done that because now he's texting me too much. All jokes aside, a woman is claiming that her grandmother is sending her text message after she died from cancer back in 2011. The granddaughter begged the cell phone company to not give away her grandmother's number, which they promised to do. But 3 years later, she was completely shocked when she looked down at her phone and saw a text from beyond the grave. A text from her grandmother. The message said, "I'm watching over you. You'll get through this. You'll be alright." She remembered that her grandmother was buried with her cell phone, so a lot of disturbing images ran through her head. What if she's there and texting in her grave? First she thought that someone might have dug up her grandmother's grave, got a hold of her cell phone, and now they're trolling. Or is it possible that her grandmother's spirit was able to text? And now topping this list, in at number 1, we have a daughter who sent her mother an apology after death. A teenager girl from New Mexico had a fight with her mother, and she left the house fueled with anger. Shortly after the fight, the teenager was involved in a devastating car crash. She was rushed to the hospital, but she was pronounced dead on arrival. A couple of hours after her death, her mother received a text message from her. It said, "Sorry mom, forgive me." I mean, that just gives me the chills. If that's in all honesty a true story, it's unbelievable, but it's scary. Oh, and did I mention that the crime scene was being cleaned up? They recovered her phone, but it was completely melted and destroyed, which makes this story even more freaky, because how was that text message even sent?
Coming in at number 10, we have William Shakespeare's grave. Billy Bob Shakespeare is one of my favourite historical figures of all time for many many reasons, but mainly because I loved his drama. William Shakespeare died in 1616 and wrote 39 plays, 154 sonnets, and 2 long narrative poems. My favourite Shakespeare play is probably The Winter's Tale. It's a classic problem play and I really enjoy it, but I also do love Macbeth as a close second. So as we know, the famous English writer had a flair for drama and a great sense of humour. With that in mind, of course he decided to place a curse on his grave. He's buried at the Holy Trinity Church in his home of Stratford-upon-Avon. On his grave he wrote, "Good friends, for love's sake forbear to dig the dust enclosed here. Blessed be man spares these stones, and cursed be he who moves my bones." Good on you, Bill. You don't want anyone messing with your bones, I feel you. When the church was restored in 2008, care was taken to keep his bones safe. I might just curse my own grave so that I don't end up getting thrown out in the trash. Good thinking. Coming in at number 9, we have the Shugborough inscription. The thing is about this tomb message is that we have no idea what it says. The Shugborough monument can be found in the grounds of Shugborough Hall in Staffordshire in England. The monument depicts the shepherds of Arcadia, in which shepherds stand around a tomb. Now the monument contains a very cryptic message that reads OUOSVAVV, and this is framed by the letters D and M. A lot of people that think that this is a code, and the monument is regularly hailed as one of the world's top unsolved ciphers. Adding to the mystery, fingers of the stone's figurines touch the letters N and R on the phase Et in Arcadia EGO. So what does this mean? Some of the world's top minds, Charles Darwin and Charles Dickens included, have actually failed to solve the text. Coming in at number 8, we have the cursed tablets. In 2003, 4 cursed tablets were found in the grave of a young woman who died around 2,400 years ago in Greece. Brilliant. Back in the day, it seems that cursed tablets were very popular, and people would inscribe curses on metal and offer them to the gods. Burying tablets with the dead was believed to give the tablets direct access to the gods, who would then decide to do the curse's bidding. The curses were aimed at then local innkeepers Demetrios and Fangoria. One of the curses found in the grave read, "Cast your hate upon Fangora and Demetrios, and their tavern and their property and their possessions. I will bind my enemy in blood and ashes with all the dead." Blimey. Another one of the curses found in the grave wished a dog ear curse upon them. Of course. From dog curses to donkey curses up at number 7. The Egyptians, as we know, were a scary bunch when it came to protecting their final resting places. Well, it seems that a donkey curse was famously found on the tomb of Der El Bari Graffito. The donkey curse invoked the god Seth, a donkey who would rape those who violated the tomb. We hear a lot about how the curse of King Tut came true, but we have no idea if the curse here came true because nobody wants to admit that they got harassed by a donkey, do they? Coming in at number 6, we have Amenhotep's shopping list. The ancient Egyptians were so dramatic, including Amenhotep, son of Hapu, who died in 1300 BC. In life, he was a priest and a scribe, and a lover of melodrama, I bet. He inscribed one of the more inventive curses that I've ever read on the doors of his final resting place. This curse actually kind of made me laugh. It reads like a shopping list of plague and pestilence. He wrote, "He who enters this tomb will lose their earthly possessions and honours, be incinerated in a furnace, in excretion of rites, capsize, drown at sea, have no successors, receive no tomb or funerary offerings of their own, and their bodies would decay because they will starve and have no sustenance, and their bones will perish." Good! Great! You get a car! No, you get a car! No, you get a car! Plagues, plagues everywhere. Coming in at number 5, we have this warning. I can't think of anything scarier than going to visit the tombstone of a loved one and finding these tasteless warning signs. Councillors in Plymouth in England placed garish yellow warning signs on the graves that they had deemed unsafe or hazardous. Basically, they were worried that they were going to topple over at some point. I'm all about preventing some danger, but honestly, bright yellow signs that cover the name of the person buried, for me it's a bit of an eyesore. Mourner Paul Ford found his grandparents' grave had one of the signs on and spoke out about how disrespectful it was, and how the message could have been at the back of the grave. True. Coming in at number 4, we have spooky old Midnight Mary. It seems that a very scary message can be found on a grave at the Evergreen Cemetery in New Haven. The inscription is actually a very ghostly warning. The grave belongs to Mary E. Hart, who died under strange circumstances in 1872. Around the top of her grave reads, "The people shall be troubled at midnight and pass away." It seems that Mary was considered somewhat of a witch in her era, and some even say that she haunts the New Haven graveyard to this day, taking souls to the underworld with her if they're by her grave at the stroke of midnight. Of course, these are probably just urban legends made up to match her spooky gravestone, although I still wouldn't want to be around at midnight just in case. You were waiting for him, here he is. Coming in at number 3 we have King Tut's Terror. Do not disturb an ancient Egyptian tomb. Message received loud and clear, although it only took the deaths of 6 people for us to realise. Now a lot of you will be familiar with the curse of the pharaohs and what happened with Tutankhamun's grave, so I will just recap really quickly. In 1922, Egyptologist Lord Carnarvon and archaeologist Howard Carter were the first to enter King Tut's tomb. Carnarvon died from a mosquito bite to the cheek shortly after the tomb was open. A similar mark was also found on the king. George J. Gold, Audrey Hepburn, Hugh Evelyn White, Aaron Ember and Archibald Douglas Reed also died shortly after coming into contact with the tomb or someone who had entered. It seems that outside the burial chamber was an inscription that read, "Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king." Also found in the tomb was a warning on a bracelet that read, "Cursed be he who moves my body, to him shall come fire, water and pestilence." Now the man on the receiving end of this bracelet actually did have his house burned down, then when it was rebuilt it was hit by a flood. Interesting. Coming in at number 2 we have a curse upon the bullies. Well, Mary of Wallingport, Massachusetts certainly got the last word, didn't she? It seems that Mary C. Delancey was a nuisance in her community. She believed her neighbours were up to no good and she would shine lights into their properties. She owned a lot of cats and would spend hours feeding pigeons, which is kinda sweet, but it also seems like she was quite the recluse. She felt her neighbours bullied her and she was unwilling to let bygones be bygones. In one final act of revenge, she wrote on her tomb, "May eternal damnation be upon those in Wallingport who without knowing me have maliciously vilified me. May the curse of God be upon them and theirs." Cool. Just curse the whole community then. Cheers, babe. Mary died in 1985, and it seems that her curse got lost in the post, as the people of Wallingport don't believe they've come across any misfortune whatsoever. The woman who actually moved into Mary's old home said to a local newspaper that the curse didn't bother her. She said, "I was frankly saddened for this lady who must have had so much turmoil in her life that she'd put this on her gravestone." Another member of the community wrote, "Nobody even takes it seriously, of course. It's a funny thing. We all laugh about it." Ooh, rough ride for old Mary. Finally, coming into number 1, one tomb that should never have been disturbed, we have Tamerlane's Terror. Did it unleash Hitler? Maybe. Tamerlane founded the Timurid Empire in the 14th century, stretching across Central Asia and Persia. Tamerlane was also known as Timur and was buried in modern-day Uzbekistan, and his burial chamber was infiltrated by Soviets. Written on the wall, there was a very scary message indeed. "When I rise from the dead, the world shall tremble. Whomsoever opens my tomb shall unleash an invader more terrible than I." Now Tamerlane was indeed terrible. The Middle East and parts of India were ransacked with their populations massacred. So, did they heed this warning? Did they hell? Soviet anthropologists dug him up, and what happened? Adolf Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military operation of all time. Now, a lot of people were killed, to just put that extremely lightly. When Stalin found out, he actually had Tamerlane reburied with full Islamic rites. Days later, the Soviets eventually and finally won a battle at the Battle of Stalingrad. Hitler did continue to plague the world for another 3 years though. Is this why?
The list at number 10. Giles Corey. Out of the 27 people who had their lives taken away from them during the 1692 Salem witch trials, 19 were hanged, 7 passed away in prison while serving their sentence, and the last victim was Giles Corey. He refused to plead either innocent or guilty, and the law at the time states you can't be tried otherwise. So what they did next was unimaginable. As his tombstone hints towards, Giles Corey was pressed to death. The townsfolk laid a heavy board on top of the 81-year-old man, and then over the course of 2 days, boulders were slowly added, making the weight more and more unbearable. They were hoping that Giles would admit something, either innocent or guilty, but every time they asked him anything, Giles responded with, "More weight." Yeah, how epic is that? Extremely brave. But sadly, after 2 days of this torture, Giles Corey passed away. He fought for so long and did what he did because if he had gone either of the other two ways, Giles would have had his property taken away by the town. But since he passed away, not admitting guilt, he was still in full possession of his estate, which immediately went to his son-in-law. Yep, Salem witch trials. Not the craziest thing that was happening on this list, to be honest with you. Salem witch trials were, yeah, horrible. Pretty horrible thing to look back on right off the bat. Number 9, Ellen Shannon. Heading over to the late 1800s for this one, and I gotta warn you, this one is pretty dark. In 1870, we obviously didn't have the same safety requirements as we do today, like at all. For example, if you wanted to read before bed, you didn't have a Kindle back in the day, you didn't have an iPad, you didn't even have a nightlight, but you did have a kerosene lamp. Ellen had used R.E. Danforth's non-explosive burning fluid, and well, dare I say it, the obvious happened. Her tomb in Pennsylvania reads in memory of Ellen Shannon, aged 26 years, who was fatally burned March 21, 1870, by the explosion of a lamp filled with R.E. Danforth's non-explosive burning fluid. Yes, that's what it actually says. And it's a tragedy. That's a horrible way to go out, don't get me wrong. But I admire that the family boldly put R.E. Danforth publicly as the cause of death here. She put him on blast. Number 8, victim of the beast. Lily E. Gray was buried in Salt Lake City Cemetery back in 1958. This one is quite recent. As far as tombstones go, this one is the most common looking as well. It's not monumental, I'm sure many have missed it in time. The message written on the stone back in 1958 says, Lily E. Gray, June 6, 1881 to November 14, 1958. Victim of the beast, 666. Now see, if that 666 wasn't there, I would be like, oh, maybe she was attacked by an animal, maybe like the beast was a natural phenomenon, like, you know, a surfing term for a large wave, or like a risky mountain trail, something like that. The 666 makes it quite specific on who they're referring to here, so that's pretty haunting. The beast sounds like something sinister, something from the underworld. In the book of Revelation, the beast is literally the Antichrist. Not sure what happened here, but the area was also known to have followers of Aleister Crowley. Crowley also referred to himself as the Beast 666. It sounds like an old Hotmail when you add numbers, doesn't it? The Beast 666. Add me. Number 7, the Ouija board. The fact that you can just buy a Ouija board from a Toys R Us now is hilarious to me. That's so creepy. They have glow-in-the-dark Ouija boards. Yeah, just in case the lights go out and you still want to communicate with the dead. And, you know, glow in the dark is fun. It's like people want to get possessed nowadays, right? Where did all this Ouija board madness start? Well, it began with Elijah Bond. Bond was the first person to ever patent the Ouija board, which is a scary feat in itself. A lot of questions already. But when he was buried, he was laid to rest in an unmarked grave. Now that was back in 1921, mind you, and it wasn't until 2007 until his resting place got an upgrade. A man named Robert Merck found his spot, raised money to get him a tombstone, and of course, it had to be a Ouija board. Yeah, if you have any words you want to say, any fan questions, bring your own easel, go ask away. Number 6, specimens. Specimens, yeah, not very large either. This one is a very small tombstone. This one is found in a cemetery near an Ohio asylum. There's actually 2 of these headstones. Both of them say specimens. Again, specimens, just that's it. The fact that these stones are the size of a shoebox also makes it even more chilling. This psychiatric facility was the first state-supported asylum in the US. Its history was dark in the early experimental treatment days, so perhaps these headstones could be body parts. You knew I was gonna say that. It's bad. It's all bad. The list gets worse, dare I say. Only halfway. Number 5, Midnight Mary. Mary E. Hart, more commonly referred to as Midnight Mary, had to be featured on this list. Back in 1872 in New Haven, Connecticut, Mary was supposedly buried alive. Yeah, accidentally. It wasn't anything horrible, although this is a pretty dark thing. It wasn't worse. Her stone has a lot of information, all things considered. The massive slab of pink stone reads, at high noon, just from and about to renew her daily work, in her full strength and body and mind, Mary E. Hart, having fallen prostrate, remained unconscious until she died at midnight, October 15th, 1872. Born December 16th, 1824. And then right underneath, there's one line that reads, the people shall be troubled at midnight and pass away. Again, you had us in the first half. The back 9 gets a little scary. Now, many have noted that this phrase is from the Old Testament, but tales of her being buried alive suggest that there might be a midnight curse hanging about this area. So if you live in this area, you now have a curfew. There you go. You have a curfew now. Go home. Number 4, Mary Jane McCune. Some of the details in this one I can't even talk about here on the Tube of You. It's really dark, really, really dark. Mary Jane McCune was the wife of one James Farrar. She was born in 1838 and passed away later in 1855. quite young. Now, with many of these tombstones, they can be pretty sparse with details, like specimens, for example. Or you can explain as much as you can in that one block, spread awareness to the public, like, any lamp mishaps. Both can be haunting to read. Underneath Mary Jane's name and dates is a message on how she passed away. Mary Jane was bitten by a rabid coyote, developed rabies, became violent, and was smothered with feather bed. Wild. The story even recalls that the husband James was away for work at the time and found out what happened only when he got back. That is so tragic. That's the thing with these old resting places. They have tons of information because, well, that was it. That was your legacy. Literally written in stone. It's like so many characters or less to explain how you died horribly. Number 3, Eugene. Humans are odd, okay? Before we get into these last few, the ancient tombstone curses, first we have to look back to 1929 and how not to preserve a mummy. Yeah, let's do it. 1929, Ohio, a corpse just appeared on the road out of nowhere. We love those. There was even an address found on this man's body, but it was an empty plot of land once they followed through. They had no name for this body, so they named him Eugene. Yeah, they named him after a local neighbor. Yeah, hey, we're gonna name this dead guy after you. Is that cool, Eugene? No? Well, too late. They used this body as an attraction. They gave it the mummy treatment, which in Ohio 1929 probably wasn't the best way, but they did it. And then 25 years later, when more and more people started asking about this Ohio mummy, they laid the man to rest. Finally, they officially buried him in 1964. So now when you see this grave, it says, Eugene, found dead in 1929, buried 1964. I bet so many people are confused if they saw this. Send them this video and then type, "You won't believe number 3." They're like, what, do you work for MA? What is this guy doing? Why did he tell me to press the thumbs up? Who is this? Number 2, ancient tomb curse. Ancient Egyptian tombs are beautiful. Even after this many years, they're well preserved. Ancient Egyptians believed that false doors were a connection to the dead, and that's how spirits were able to travel here and there. Most false doors can be found in the west wall because Egyptians believed that the west was the land of the dead. The walls of ancient Egyptian tombs are also full of jewelry, art, clothing, basically anything valuable you may need in the afterlife to impress the gods. You're offering up your finest treasures, but with that comes a warning from these gods. One warning trespassers that the gods will wring their neck like that of a goose if you were to steal anything that wasn't yours in these tombs. Inside the found tomb of Enigmatic, for example, who was a pharaoh official 4,000 years ago, inside their tomb a curse was left over. He was buried in Mastaba in an above ground massive tomb, and left on the wall was this warning: "Might do against this, my tomb, the same shall be done to your property." And then it continues to warn trespassers of Enigmatic's knowledge of secret spells and magic, and threatens to fill impure intruders with a fear of seeing ghosts. Yeah, I think that ought to do the trick. Yeah, no way I'm messing with an ancient magician pharaoh. I'm good. I'm definitely all good. And finally, number 1, KV55. Yeah, we'll end this list on an ancient Egyptian tomb, with perhaps the most chilling message left over of all time. This tomb was found, of course, in the Valley of the Kings by Edward Ayrton back in 1907. It was discovered right next to King Tut's tomb. This was a big deal. But the reason we referred to this tomb by a number rather than a name is because, well, we still have no idea who it was made for. Even the walls of the tomb inside, they aren't covered with any hieroglyphs, no artwork, no fake doors. There isn't any clothing laying around, there's no jewelry, it's just bare, which is extremely odd given what I just told you. As you walk down the 20 steps towards KV55, you'll notice only a few markings on the entrance, markings that show that the entrance was widened since it was first cut, along with the ceiling being raised higher. So adjustments were made at some point, meaning this was not a forgotten project by any means, which makes it creepier. The only hint as to who or what is buried remains on the wall, and it's one hieroglyph. That hieroglyph translates to, "The evil one shall not live again." Yeah, I sure hope not. I've seen The Mummy, and I really hope not. I'm all set. Cheers on that one. List at number 10, ancient curse. We'll kick this list off in ancient Egypt, then we'll work our way up to more modern stuff. You know how it is. When officials found the tomb of Enigmatic, a pharaoh official that lived 4,000 years ago, they also found a warning. A message, a curse rather. It was written right there on the wall. That's how you know that you're f***ed. Buried in a mastaba, an above ground massive tomb, held this warning. It reads, "Might do against this, my tomb, the same shall be done to your property." Yeah, you mess with my stuff, I'll haunt you and your family. How does that sound? Deal? Alright, deal. It also warns of Enigmatic's knowledge of secret spells and magic, and it threatens to fill impure intruders with a fear of seeing ghosts. Yeah, this pharaoh official wasn't f***ing around, that's for sure. Number 9, remember death. Yes, can't forget. Turning the calendars a bit forward now to 1794 AD. A man named James Leeson was 38 at the time of his passing. Now his grave is in New York, and it's one of the most visited graves ever. The message left over on his tombstone is quite simple. It's just a few symbols. symbols, some Harry Potter stuff going on. That's all it takes on an otherwise standard headstone. There's an hourglass with wings, a flaming urn, and a stonecutter's tool, suggesting that this person may have been a mason. There's one line at the top that was decoded a century later. In 1889, somebody finally figured out another message, and this message said, "Remember death." So now that we know this, those symbols become a bit more eerie. An hourglass with wings, that symbolizes time passing quickly, and the flaming urn represents a soul's immortality. Nice, how lovely. Again, on my headstone, it'll say like and or subscribe. Number 8, Ellen Shannon. In 1870, we obviously didn't have the same safety requirements as we do today. Wemyss wasn't born yet. We didn't have anything, right? No safety hats, nothing like that. For example, if you wanted to read a little novel before bed, you didn't have a kind Kindle with you. You didn't even have a nightlight for that matter, but you did have a kerosene lamp. How lucky are you? That's horrible. That's pretty much all you had back then. Ellen had used R.E. Danforth's non-explosive burning fluid, and well, dare I say, the obvious happened. You know the title of this list. Pretty grim. Her tombstone in Pennsylvania doesn't shy away from the cause of her untimely death. See, in a time before Twitter, this was the best way to spread awareness on otherwise a horrible product. Ellen Shannon's tombstone reads, "In memory of Ellen Shannon, aged 26 years old, who was fatally burned on the 21st of March 1870 by the explosion of a lamp filled with R.E. Danforth's non-explosive burning fluid." Yeah, that's a tragedy, of course, and that's a horrible way to go out, but I admire that the family boldly put R.E. Danforth himself publicly as the cause of her death. They put him on blast, for lack of a better term. Number 7, Midnight Mary. Back in 1872 in New Haven, Connecticut, Mary E. Hart, aka Midnight Mary, was placed in a casket and buried, thought to be dead. But really, she was still alive. Yeah, just unconscious. She was accidentally buried alive. How terrible is that? And Mary's tombstone has a lot of information, all things considered. The massive slab of pink stone reads, "At high noon, just from and about to renew her daily work in her full strength of body and mind, Mary E. Hart had fallen, remained unconscious until she died at midnight, October 15th, 1872. Born December 16th, 1824. And then underneath there's one line that reads, "The people shall be troubled at midnight and pass away." Alright, that one line's a bit much. Who added that? That's up. Many have noted that this phrase is from the Old Testament, sure, but the tale of her being buried alive suggests that there might be a midnight curse lurking about. Either way, that is a horrible, horrible way to go out. That's probably my worst fear. That's my new worst fear. Number 6, ancient entanglement. Alright, once a thriving, beautiful city in ancient Rome, Pompeii was sadly destroyed in 79 AD. Now, the eruption of Mount Vesuvius buried the ancient city in volcanic ash, and excavation didn't begin until the 18th century, much later, and after a full century of careful excavation, the city was then reopened to the public once again. And now we're at the point where we're uncovering even more art and even more messages from that time. Yeah, messages found on the walls of ancient buildings in Pompeii. There's one exchange that I love personally. It's about two men named Successus and Severus, and here's the message. Let's do this. Successus, a weaver, loves the innkeeper's girl. Her name was Iris. She, however, did not love him. T. Now still he begs her to have pity on him. Now his rival Severus wrote back on, again, said wall. He added to this message and he wrote, "Goodbye, envious one. Why do you get in the way? Submit to a handsomer man and one who is being treated very wrongly and good looking. I have spoken. I have written all that there is to say. You love Iris, but she does not love you." Yeah, a lot of drama going on, right? And then Mount Vesuvius randomly erupted and then nobody settled their beef ever. Yeah, this is why you don't waste time in love triangles, okay? Just let her go. Hit that thumbs up and let her go. Mount Vesuvius could go off any day, and you're stuck in an entanglement. Get out of here. It's not 79 AD anymore. Number 5, Eugene. 1929, Ohio. A corpse just randomly appeared on the road, just right in the middle of the road. Just 1920s things, I guess. There was an address found on this man's body, but that address led to an empty plot of land. They also had no name for this man as well, so they named him Eugene. They just named him after a local neighbor. That's a pretty odd exchange. Like, hey, we're gonna name this guy after you. No worries, yeah, we just found him. They used this body as an attraction. He was a mummy that people would visit when they swung by in town. Like a museum attraction, only not a pharaoh and a man from the 1920s in Ohio. Little little different. Now, when people started to ask more about this mummy in Ohio, this random ass mummy, locals all agreed to finally lay the stranger to rest, underground and not, as an attraction, ideally. So now when you see his grave, it just says Eugene, found dead 1929 and buried 1964. Yeah, I bet so many people see this and they're so confused. They're like, what? Send them this video and be like, hey, you're not gonna believe number 5. Watch this guy. Watch this guy with a beanie explain it. He's much better at it than me. Number 4. Mary Jane McCune. Mary Jane McCune was the wife of one James Farrar. Now, she was born in 1838 and she passed away in 1855. Underneath Mary Jane's name is a message on how she passed. And fair warning, like the others, this is quite grim. It says Mary Jane McCune was bitten by a rabid coyote, developed rabies, became violent, and was then smothered with feather bed. Holy shit. Again, imagine just seeing that in the middle of nowhere. It's like, Todd, what the fuck? Barry. The story even recalls that the husband James was away for work at the time all this happened, and he only found out what happened as soon as he got back. That's so tragic. That's the thing with these old resting places. They have tons of information because that was the only way, really, to spread it. That was your legacy. It was literally written in stone. Rabies, smothered. I'm like, oh my god, can we leave some of this out? This is pretty dark. Number 3, KV 55. This tomb was found in the Valley of the Kings by Edward Ayrton back in 1907. It was discovered right next to King Tut's tomb. It was a big deal. But the reason we call this tomb by a number rather than, King Tut's tomb or another name is because we have no idea who it was made for. It's just bare, which is extremely odd for an ancient tomb like this. But as you walk down the 20 steps towards KV 55, you'll notice only a few markings on the entrance. Markings that show that the entrance was once widened since its first cut, along with its ceiling being raised higher. So again, somebody important was in here. It's just a matter of why they were important, right? What did they do? What happened? A little bit of history. The only hint as to who is buried remains on the walls, and it's in one hieroglyph. And that hieroglyph translates to, "The evil one shall not live again." Okay, well, I sure hope not. Whatever happened in there, I've seen the mummy, I'm all set. Let's keep it shut. Number 2, bone compass warning. Okay, just because we've been talking about graves doesn't mean these messages have to be written or carved or drawn per se. Sometimes these messages can be as simple as leaving animal bones on the ground. Yeah, that ought to speak for itself. You see that in the woods, you're on your way. See you later. In St. Augustine, for example, the remains of a donkey were found buried underground, and judging from the skull, it had been clearly hunted down by humans, right? It was very not normal. Now that's not the mysterious part. The mysterious part here is that all the bones have been carefully separated. There's no marks to suggest that any tools were used at all, so researchers believe that this animal wasn't meant for food. Maybe sacrifice? I don't know, it's odd. Either way, it's pretty dark. The limbs were placed to point north and south directly. They used this donkey as a compass. How rude is that? Donkeys in that area in Florida in the 17th century, that's not bizarre. But the way that these bones were buried, that definitely is. What's the message here, right? What's the point if there is one? If you reach the pile of bones, you've gone too far? What is this? Someone help me out. And finally, number 1, Paris catacombs. We have to end with this massive tomb. It was built in the late 18th century, and the Paris catacombs are massive. The place is literally filled with bones, so of course it needs to have a warning before you enter, right? That's probably fair. That would suck to accidentally stumble upon. You're about to walk into a room full of heads. Yeah, heads up. Since opening day, there's been a message carved above the entrance of the Paris catacombs, and that message translates to "Stop in the name of love." No, I'm just kidding, it doesn't. It translates to "Stop, this is the empire of the dead." And at that point, I would go, okay.
Starting off with number 10 are the letters. Now this one was shared by Hot Sheet Motel on Reddit, who used to work as a groundskeeper at a cemetery back in the 70s. He shared that he used to find so many weird miscellaneous items at the graveyard, but the creepiest thing he found were a series of scribbled letters that a widow kept leaving on her husband's grave. She would tear them out from a reporter's notebook and they were virtually illegible. The user could not make out what any of the sentences meant, but could read certain words like revenge, anti-Christ, and sacrifice, which I don't even know if I want to know what she was talking about. I feel like we should just leave that. Let's just pretend it never happened. I don't need that in my life right now. 2019 was bad enough without the Antichrist coming in. Coming in at number 9 is the body. Not dead, but plot twist, still alive. Back in September of 2009, a mourner found 71-year-old Donald Constantine Jackson's unconscious, bloody and beaten body at the Pine Hills Cemetery. He was rushed to the hospital but died a few days later due to his injuries, and around the same time, a 26-year-old man called Mojave Takley from Toronto turned himself in on charges of first-degree murder of Donald.
Apparently, an unidentified girl got into an argument with Donald, and when he tried walking away from her, she followed him to the cemetery where Mojave then joined her. He then beat Donald before they both fled the scene. Imagine going to the cemetery to mourn a deceased relative and finding a half-dead person yourself. I'd be shook, but also why would you beat up a 71-year-old man? Like, what are people thinking? Honestly, what are people thinking? At number 8, we have anti-Semitism. So back in March of this year, countless graves at a Jewish cemetery in Massachusetts were vandalized with anti-Semitic hate messages. Things like "Hitler was right," "This is MAGA country," "Expel the Jew," and "Oy vey." Upon further investigation, police also found swastikas and other anti-Semitic graffiti scratched into the backs of tombstones. Not even just written, full on scratched and carved in. Like, that's so shocking and racist. And I feel like Louis Gitlan, a man who has relatives buried at the cemetery, summed up the incident quite well. He said these people faced persecution through their whole lives. What do they go through to get to this place and finally be free, then realize they can't escape it ever? Say less, Louis, say less, I agree with you. Filling at number 7 slot is the chicken. A now deleted user on Reddit shared that he was a cemetery worker and he went into his shift one day to find a live chicken shackled to a gravestone. And that is literally all he shared. Like, I have so many questions. How do you even shackle a live chicken to a gravestone, and why would you even do that? People were speculating that perhaps it was part of some voodoo or ritualistic practice, because many do involve live chickens in some way or another. Other commenters went further and said it was Santeria practice. People who follow this religion offer an orisha, which is a spirit similar to God, food, and they also sacrifice animals to them so they can build and maintain a powerful relationship with that spirit. It's not to bring them closer in worship in any way, but to make them more aware of the orisha within them. So perhaps the person who died was part of this faith and their fellow worshippers were trying to bring the deceased peace in their afterlife. I don't really know. But that is a message if I ever saw one. A live chicken. I don't want that kind of message. No. Now at number 6 is the premonition. This was shared by Maddie Barnett, who shared she usually feels quite at home in graveyards. Weird flex, but okay. She said her and her partner did a road trip back to Dubu in 2017 and ended up staying at a hotel about a block away from a cemetery. One day when her partner was napping, she decided to explore and went to the graveyard. She was walking by the tombstones and saying hello to them, and from a distance she saw this marble angel that she was just instantly drawn to. When she reached the angel, she looked at the name on the grave and her heart stopped. The name read Madison Barnett, which was her name, but the thing is there was no year of death on the tomb, which she thought was very odd. There usually is. Freaking out, she rushed back to the hotel, woke up her partner and took them to the graveyard to see it for themselves. But when they got to the angel, it didn't say Madison Barnett anymore, it was a different girl's name. Maddie just couldn't figure out how she had so clearly seen her name 10 minutes beforehand and now it was just so clearly gone. She and her partner speculated that it was a premonition or message of some kind telling her that she was soon to be next. That is a message I never want to receive in my life ever. Thankfully I have a very uncommon name, so hopefully I never see my name on another tombstone that's not me. Coming in at number 5 is the voodoo. This one was shared by Reddit user Closet Psycho, who said she's not a cemetery worker, but she did used to visit a loved one in her local graveyard every single week. One day when she was going, she noticed something very off. On every third grave, someone or some people had left red candles. Along with the red candles on certain graves, not all of them, they had also created circles made from beads around the gravestones. The user's father's grave was included in that category and they were 100% sure it was some ritual of some kind. Either that or they were sending a message to the spirits of the graveyard saying either stay away from these specific graves or target these specific graves. One or the other, there's no in between. Either way, the user disposed of the things on their dad's grave ASAP and alerted the groundskeepers straight away. At number 4 is the eggplant. This one was shared by Reddit user Punha Towney, who said 30 minutes before a funeral started, an unidentified person showed up and was just standing near the freshly dug grave. Which isn't really weird. I mean, many people come early to funerals and mourn in their own way. Maybe they want privacy. It wasn't really setting off any alarm bells for the user. But 10 minutes later, the user got a call from their manager saying someone had put something inside the grave, not the body. Confused, the user went to investigate and found an eggplant with holes in it, and those holes were stuffed with strips of paper and a picture. The user was dumbfounded but also thought perhaps it was a Santeria ritual, the same religion I mentioned in the chicken story. But either way, how long did this person think the eggplant was gonna last before it decayed? Like, what was the purpose of this? Someone commented saying the eggplant is a belladonna herb, and since it was left there to rot and sour, that's most likely what the person wanted to do to their target. Which, I mean, that's salty. I mean, they've already died. You don't need to add insult to injury, just let them die. You've already won. You're alive. Filling our number 3 slot is the Victor, and back in July of 2010 at 5 PM, a woman was on the main path of Pine Hill Cemetery. And mind you, 5 PM is a pretty safe time to be out, you'd assume, especially in the summer where it doesn't get dark at like 4 PM like it does now. The woman was dragged off the path by a man later identified as 44-year-old sex offender Russell Kirkpatrick. Russell then proceeded to rape and beat her till she was unconscious and then left her there to presumably die. She was found 5 hours later trying to cling onto some kind of a life and get up from the ground, and was quickly taken to the hospital. Thankfully, enough tips came in to lead to Kirkpatrick's arrest, and the woman did end up surviving. But wow, how many half-alive bodies are we gonna find at cemeteries, you guys? And what kind of scum of the earth do you have to be to rape someone, and on top of that, rape them while they're trying to mourn a loved one? Scumbag. Now at number 2 are the crosses. This one was shared by Redditor Patrick R's Ghost, who's not a cemetery worker but just an avid ghost hunter. Now, Patrick was walking through a cemetery he was interested in when he came upon an interesting looking grave. Tell me how many times I've said interesting in this video, you guys. Comment below. Now this grave had glass beads on the side of it in parallel lines. It had an arrangement of different toys on the grave itself, and there was a small ring of stones lining the back of the gravestone. But the weirdest part was that there were cross necklaces plunged into the ground all around the grave in a circle. I don't know what kind of message that was, but apparently the user said sometimes that's done so the human soul can transcend to their destination safely. But a circle of cross necklaces is very specific. I feel like that was also a message to ward off evil spirits from the specific person, to show that this person is protected very heavily by cross necklaces and toys and other things. And finally, at number 1 is the body. So this one was also shared by Redditor Hot Sheet Motel, the graveyard groundskeeper from the 70s. He said the worst thing he ever came across was the naked corpse of a girl his age that went to a neighboring high school in the area. He found her with her arms neatly at her sides and noticed strangulation marks on her neck. The killer also punched her several times in the face before she actually died, and the person left a small note in her hand that read "good luck." The girl was identified, but the murder itself was never solved, and her clothes were also never found. The user was questioned multiple times by the police, but obviously he didn't know anything about it. Now I'm confused though, because was it the killer that left that note in her hand and that was meant to be like a good luck finding me sort of thing, or had the girl been part of some kind of blackmail and she had been clutching the good luck note from a previous message she received? Like, I don't know the backstory. It's a bit sus.
Starting off at number 10, A Cat Lady's Revenge. Over in Wallingport, Massachusetts, Mary Delancey had a bone to pick with her neighbors. According to locals, Mary Delancey and her neighbors just didn't get along. So, when she passed at the age of 79, she made sure to leave a sinister message for her neighbors on her gravestone. It reads, "May eternal damnation be upon those in Wallingport, who, without knowing me, have maliciously vilified me. May the curse of God be upon them and theirs." And that must sting. And it did sting enough that her neighbors did try to get the headstone changed or removed in court. Why was there so much beef in this area though? What's the reason behind the grave grudge? It turns out that Mary's neighbors weren't fans of how many cats she owned, and Mary must have taken that to heart, or taken that to the grave. Sorry for the pun. At number 9, Rat It Out. One unfortunate fate outlined on a tombstone is the fate of Erin O'Keefe. Back in 1876, she met her unfortunate demise, as it says on her tombstone, by being eaten by mountain rats on Pikes Peak. John O'Keefe, alleged father to Erin, told a story about giant man-eating rats in the mountains caves that attacked their family and led to Erin's demise. The story goes that the rats could eat a side of beef in under 5 minutes, and the family felt that pressure while they were being attacked. While John tried to use a club to fend off the rats, his wife Nora was electrocuting them with a coil of wire. Sounds pretty cool, right? While this message on the tombstone is haunting, the grave is a fake. John made it to go along with his story that he came up with once it hit papers. He didn't have a wife and never had a daughter. It was all just a story of spin. So while that scary message really does exist on headstone, it is built on lies, but the next one isn't. At number 8, an unfortunate turn. Unlike the last story, this one is a true run-in with an animal. This is all the way back in 1855. At that time, rabies was basically a death sentence, since the rabies vaccine wasn't invented for another 30 years. It's a nearly unsurvivable disease, and it caught hold of Mary Jane McEwen. While in her chicken coop, she was bitten by a coyote, and that coyote, you guessed it, had rabies. Mary began to fall more and more ill, then grew more and more out of control. If you are unaware, rabies symptoms include aggressiveness and hallucinations, among other things. To make it all worse, Mary Jane was pregnant when she was bitten by the coyote, but there was no cure. So, for the presumed reason that the disease would spread, she was smothered to death. Her husband only found out when he returned home from business. And the full inscription of her grave is, bitten by rabid coyote, developed rabies, became violent, was smothered with feather bed. When husband returned, she and her unborn child were dead and buried. This is another sad pregnancy story at number 7, victim of an unforgiving society. For this one, I'll share the inscription first because really, the message left on her tombstone really says it all for Kate McCormick. Seduced and pregnant by her father's friend, unwed, she died from abortion, her only choice. Abandoned in life and death by family, with but a single rose from her mother. Buried only through the kindness of unknown benefactors, died February 1875, age 21, victim of an unforgiving society, have mercy on us. According to findagrave.com, her real name was Kate Simpson. While it's good that she could get a proper grave and burial with a headstone, it's scary to think how trapped she was in the situation that led to her death. Abandoned in life and death by family, not exactly the end anyone hopes to have. Not that anyone hopes to have in it. At number 6, we have another story of a daughter. This one, doorstep daughter. This eerie headstone has a more tragic backstory. The headstone reads, Unwanted Baby Girl X. Now, here's how this came to be. On July 8, 1954, a baby was left on the porch of 828 North Elm Street. There's no idea where the baby came from, and she was a premature baby that weighed less than 3 pounds. For a point of reference today, typically, babies need to weigh 4 pounds and show some signs of steady weight gain to come out of a hospital's incubator. So as a baby not in an incubator and left on a porch, that's not a good sign of survival. The baby did survive a week before, tragically, she passed. I assume because the people who found her did not have high hopes for how long she would survive, she never had a name. She became known as Unwanted Baby Girl X, which now marks her grave. But another unique grave name is at number 5, specimens. So, graves are typically for people, right? Like, I know pets are too sometimes buried, and I know I buried my hamster Alice, but typically graves and headstones are for people. And that's what makes the next grave kind of stray from the norm. Located in the state of Ohio Asylum for the Insane Cemetery, there are many headstones without names. This is likely since it was mostly used for patients whose family did not claim them once they died, or patients were too poor to afford a funeral. But here's where I'm getting to. Among all these headstones are 2 stones marked as specimens with no other text. This then gives them no context, and it kind of really lets the mind wander. Are there humans buried there, or animals, human remains, some organs that needed to be put somewhere? Just specimens. Like, what do you think is there? Moving on, number 4, Lonely in Death. The next headstone belongs to one Hugh Emerson. Hugh was quite possibly a loner, according to the melancholy epitaph on his headstone. His friends and kindred all unknown, he died as he had lived, alone. While poetic, it's also really sad. If you're thinking that this is more sad than scary, just think about the truly scary and isolating feeling of being alone in the world and then get back to me. If I stumbled upon this while I was having a brisk walk through a graveyard, I really think this would send me down an existential spiral. So, best to Hugh, but let's not hover on that. So on to number 3, prepare for death. Sometimes people decide to leave strongly worded messages on their graves for people they had known, or just strongly worded messages, and one person that did this is Elizabeth Eaton. She is buried in Maine, and the message she left really gives me the shivers. She left a strong message on her grave after her death in 1806, and it says, "Those active limbs in this cold grave laid, which I possessed and have to nature paid, that debt you owe and soon you must repay, prepare for death and the great rising day." Like, excuse me, Elizabeth, prepare for death? I feel like this is trying to spook me personally, and I get that in this instance it may be referring to the second coming of Christ or something along those lines, but the way it's worded kind of reads to make it sound a little more sinister than that. Like owing and repaying debt, preparing for death, it's not something I feel that reads as nice and light. Now let's move on to number 2, a child's grave. A child passing is always a troubling experience, so this next message does make sense. In Hampstead Cemetery, London, England, this child's grave also gives you that troubling feeling. If you just look at it, the dark eyes of the Teletubby Poe kind of bore into you, and Poe is holding colorful balloons, and yes, the eyes kind of look soulless, but this creepiness may be enhanced since associating the joy of youthful TV shows with the death of a child is unsettling. What is also unsettling is the inscription. Our dreams lie buried here. This grave accurately depicts the scary reality of child mortality, and I hope the family of this child has found peace, because the grave itself kind of pushes in that. But anyways, on to our last one, Marjorie McCall. The epitaph on Marjorie McCall's tombstone comes with a wild story. Lived once, buried twice. I'll let that sit with you for a second. Think about what could have happened. Now I'll tell you. So the first time Marjorie was buried was because she was believed to have passed due to a fever. She was buried quickly to hopefully stop the possible spread of the fever. Thing was, she was buried with this really nice ring. So the night after Marjorie was buried, grave robbers immediately dug her up and tried to take it from her unmoving body. It wouldn't really slide off her finger, so they thought they would cut it off the corpse. But Marjorie wasn't yet a corpse. In that moment, she awoke from her coma and screamed as her finger was bleeding because someone was trying to cut it off, and then the grave robbers were just sent running. And now the story says that when she came home and knocked on the door, her husband swore the knock was just like hers in kind of disbelief. Then when he opened the front door, it said he just dropped dead in shock. He was buried in her original burial site. Now, Marjorie herself went on to have another full life with another husband and more children, and then she passed away when she was older and buried in Lurgan, Ireland. But I feel like that last one is kind of a wild ride, you know, especially when you think about being buried alive. The good thing is she probably didn't notice because she was in a coma, but still, I think it's a pretty common fear. Being buried alive is not optimal.